Unit 12, Reading 2.
In the last half of the 20th century, the Middle East, also called the Near East, saw repeated wars and changes in alliances. American money, weapons, and diplomacy had big effects on this region. Two big American goals in the Middle East had developed: ensuring reliable oil supplies and protecting the nation of Israel. These two goals sometimes needed to be balanced carefully. During the Cold War, the US and USSR competed for influence in the Middle East and allied with different countries. Several big oil-producing nations became American allies, like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Iran was a US ally until 1979. Countries like Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Egypt were more friendly with the USSR. After the horrors of violence against European Jews in World War II, Israel became a new democratic country in 1948, but the Jewish nation was surrounded by enemies. Israel fought several wars with its Arab neighbors like Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In June 1967, Israel's military achieved a surprising victory in the Six-Day War. Many Americans were impressed by how this small country had won against big enemies. Israel began to look like a strong, valuable ally. American Jews and Christians especially believed in having a close relationship with Israel. U.S. diplomats at the UN often supported Israel against international criticism over issues like conflicts with Palestinians. Israel also received major U.S. military aid. Terrorist attacks against Israelis strengthened U.S. support. In the Camp David Accords, President Carter helped to arrange a big peace agreement between Israel and Egypt in 1978. To help keep its peace with Israel, Egypt began to receive major U.S. military aid and became a U.S. ally. In 1973, many oil-producing countries refused to sell oil to allies of Israel. This caused a short but painful oil crisis. The price of oil increased 400%, and the U.S. became even more determined to protect oil supplies. In the 70s, Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer, agreed to only accept U.S. dollars as payment for oil. The U.S. also agreed to help defend Saudi Arabia. Oil-rich countries often safely deposited their U.S. dollars in U.S. banks or invested them in U.S. bonds and businesses. This trading system, the petrodollar system, helped to keep the U.S. dollar as the most important global currency. Since so many countries needed dollars to buy oil, dollars were preferred in global trade. U.S. trade sanctions also became a powerful economic force. Under trade sanctions, a country could not buy or sell goods very easily because of international access to banks. Growing numbers of people in the region opposed American influence. Most Muslim countries were outraged by conflicts with Israel, so American support for Israel created anger. Many people in the region believed that governments like Saudi Arabia and Iran were harsh and corrupt. American support for these countries was unwelcome. Finally, some people in conservative Islamic societies believed that American cultural influence was weakening traditional cultures. The Shah, King of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was a reliable U.S. ally in the 60s and 70s. The anti-communist Shah wanted to modernize his country while his harsh secret police protected his wealth and power. The Shah became unpopular among his people. Both liberal and religious Iranians believed he was corrupt and cruel. The Shah was forced to leave Iran in the 1979 Iranian Revolution and fled to the U.S. for protection. An Iranian student protest group broke into the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held American diplomats captive for over a year. This created huge anger in America and major embarrassment for President Carter. The new Iranian government was conservative Islamist, not pro-communist. It supported Israel's enemies and sometimes threatened oil shipping in the Persian Gulf. Over the following decades, America kept trade sanctions on Iran. Relations between the two countries would continue to be very hostile or very poor.